Everybody, my name is Brenna. I'm a community organizer with the National Nonprofit Food and Water Watch, and I'm based here in Los Angeles. I've been with Food and Water Watch for 2 years. I specifically wanted to work on food and water issues, and specifically was drawn to fracking because it builds a way that it brings so many people together that usually wouldn't work together. Unlike working on climate change, which is sort of this polarizing issue for a lot of different political pundits and things, fracking is this issue where it's bringing conservatives out. It's bringing people that are dealing with property issues. It's a climate change issue, and you see people, bedfellows coming in that never were, and possibilities to organize our communities and our world for the better. You see we're all in the same boat. So I guess what to share about fracking, I'll be pretty brief, and then I always feel like questions are more interesting than me talking. I'll just tell you three things about fracking here. One is that there's zero way to do this practice safely. Do you guys, who knows really what fracking is? There's day. What fracking is? And you know, it's happening here in California, Los Angeles, and here in historic West Adams. Well, we don't know for sure.
No, it's not happening here. The water in Acapulco is totally safe to drink.
We don't have confirmation of that, but we have seen Halliburton trucks driving in, which go, Halliburton provides chemicals, so we're thinking. There's three things to take away. There's no way to do this practice safely. We linked to thousands of cases of water contamination across this country. Here in LA, we know from the South Coast Air Quality Management District that finally started requiring reporting that they're using, since June of 2013, they've had about 600 releases of 12 of the most dangerous air toxic chemicals to human health, like formaldehyde and hydrochloric acid. These are things that are known carcinogenic chemicals, known toxic chemicals, cause severe respiratory problems. So this is not hearsay anymore. It's very local. What we know is happening. It's being released into our air and into our communities. The second thing is, again, it's happening here, and people are getting very, very sick. You guys probably heard about the Alenco well. Again, that one is also not confirmed that it's this, but the big picture here is the reason why all these old oil wells are opening up that were formerly closed. Why were they closed? Because they couldn't use old technology. So whatever you call it, they're using increasing pressure, they're using chemicals, and all of which are much more risky. But period, even conventional oil in dense urban communities isn't right. And so the Alenco well, people were getting nightly nosebleeds for 3 years with just like absolutely inhumane conditions. And it took the federal EPA coming out and Barbara Boxer, and the EPA officials got sick. So finally, after 3 years of the city and the state failing them, it was like, oh, maybe there really is something wrong, and they realized that there was real violations happening. And they're fracking, we know for sure, in Baldwin Hills and Inglewood, and they have since 2006. There's severe health problems, there's land movement, there's property value concerns, there's increases in cancers. One street that has like 5 brain cancers on the same street, like really rare clusters. And the third thing to take away out of all this depressing news is that there's something that we can do about it. And that's why I love working with Food and Water Watch. I've worked with several nonprofits, and anyone knows that I've worked with that literally there's no difference between what I say and what I do and what I can do with this nonprofit. And it's about building people power, that we can win against money power. We can and we are. New York has had a moratorium and no fracking for 7-8 years now. And it's because they've dogged Governor Cuomo across the state, and he knows that it's his political future. He will never, ever have a political future if he opens up fracking in New York. And that took a long time. Thousands of people turned out rallies, but it's clear. Vermont has this, numerous other cities. Just this past year, 4 Colorado cities banned fracking. Incredibly conservative towns. If they can do it, anyone can do it. And the industry spent millions of dollars. So it's really empowering what we can do. And here in Los Angeles, LA City Council advanced a moratorium on this practice in the city of LA. The big picture here is we have statewide bills. They're probably not going to pass again this year just because the politics at the statewide level. So what we really need is we need local cities to rise up and protect us. Like New York, it took like 150 cities and municipalities to pass motions before the state did. And that's what we're doing. But it's really ordinary people. It's you and me. It's our schools, our teachers, moms, walking the streets. It's what CoWatchingOilLA did. We can do this. And we are doing this. We don't hear about it because they don't want to hear about it. And so we can't protect our future. And in fact, it's the only thing that's left for us to do. So yeah. I guess that's the big picture. Take away. And I'll just close with saying, we're working at the station in California for 2 years, and it's amazing. 2 years ago, people laughed at us and you can't get a statewide bill introduced, you can't ban fracking, you can't do this. And because of community organizing, we pushed Holly Mitchell to introduce the bill, and she's continued to do it. And it's because of people pressured her and just did local things, talking with their neighbors, getting their homeowners association to pass a resolution doing this. Eventually we had 20, and eventually she knew that she had to move forward with it. So let's keep on.
That's wonderful. Well, I am DonnaAnn Ward, and I'm the founder of CoWatchingOilLA. CoWatchingOilLA stands for Citizens of West Adams for Transparency, Common Sense, and Health in Natural Gas and Oil Industries, LA. And I drank a lot of caffeine to come up with that acronym. Brenna Norton is very, very humble. She is a wealth of technical information. Brenna Norton can tell you in and out decades of legislation, toxic spills, health compromise situations, legislators stepping up to the plate, backing away from the plate, statistics. She's a wealth of information. Food and Water Watch has been a wonderful, wonderful ally to CoWatchingOilLA. CoWatchingOilLA is just a bunch of people who live in historic West Adams. So how many people here felt the earthquake last night? The wells in La Habra Heights have been drilled since the 20s, I think 1918 when it started. They're just lame wells. They kept drilling them and they weren't producing, they kept drilling them and they weren't producing, and they sold them and somebody else bought, and so. Was it last year? I posted this on Facebook. In May of 2013, Matrix Oil Company applied for 3 permits to rework the wells in La Habra Heights. And that is exactly, which means they're well stimulating. Well stimulating is the oil industry. So they've been stimulating these wells, and that is exactly where the earthquake happened. The earthquake that happened about 10 days ago was within the zone for a result from fracking at a field in Beverly Hills. So one thing that we know is that fracking causes earthquakes. The oil industry will tell you fracking doesn't pollute your water, it doesn't toxify your air, it doesn't erode the land under your building, it doesn't crack your foundation, it doesn't cause earthquakes. We know that all of that is not true. So what happened, because Brenna is the tech person, what happened with CoWatchingOilLA is the Murphy oil field is 7 blocks from here. It's 9 blocks from here. I'm 7 blocks from the well. So what happened was, the ground was broken in 1961, and we've lived with oil production in this neighborhood for 50 years. It was bought by Freeport McMoRan, who began reworking the wells. And this is a term that they will use. They're reworking. So they're changing technology. One of the things we know is that the oil industry is now backing off of calling acidization fracking. Acidization is very popular to use in the state of California because of the kind of ground that we're on. And instead of blowing up the rock and cracking it, they use acid to dissolve the rock or increase the size of the pores and that sort of thing, soften it up. So the oil flows. I like to say fracking is like, you have a big glass of ice with your cool summer drink in it, and the ice locks up and you can't get all the liquid out of it, and you have to sort of like take your straw and bash it up so you can get all the liquid. Well, that's what fracking is. And what they do in California is they do it with acid. So we're a historic preservation overlay zone. We're the largest historic district west of the Mississippi. Jefferson Park, this particular part of historic West Adams, is the premier arts and crafts bungalow district in the country. We are regularly cited, we're filmed, we're visited, we're on tour for our architecture. So in November of last year, Freeport McMoRan, the largest gold and copper developer in the world, puts up this huge wall, this huge metal wall around the well. And then they put this huge drilling rig up, and then they put these huge lights up, and they start drilling, and there's pounding, and people are, their house is shaking, and there's ash in the air, and people have these giant lights shining in their windows at night because they're allowed to work 24 hours a day. It's been explained to us in very layman's terms, when you dig an oil well, it's like digging a hole at the beach. If you stop digging, it fills in. So when they get the permit to drill, they drill 24/7 until it's done. So people said, what the AT double hockey sticks is happening in my tiny little neighborhood that I can't sleep, and the dog's coming in from the yard at night covered with ash, and my house is shaking. So we are, don't take this the wrong way, New Yorkers, but we are just like Manhattan here in historic West Adams. We're a bunch of little neighborhoods that are all quilted together under a United Neighbors Neighborhood Council. So we have a very active neighborhood council. So the neighborhood council started to look and say, who are these people who have moved into our neighborhood? We don't know who they are. They haven't contacted us. We don't know what's going on. And it turns out they have violated. They violated building and safety on 3 fronts. 1, they erected a sound wall, which is in direct violation of the Historic Preservation Overlay Zone. 2, they drilled without a permit. And 3, they drilled for oil and gas without a permit. So this is pointed out to Freeport McMoRan, and they said, oh, oops, we made a mistake. The United Neighbors Neighborhood Council said, we get it. It's difficult, it's tricky, HPOZ, you have to meet with the zoning, the planning, you have to go downtown, all this stuff. So then in December, they violate the new division of AQMD, which is 1148.2, and 1148.2 was created to track fracking. The problem with 1148.2 and all regulation with oil and gas is it's self-reporting. You fill out the form and tell them what you're doing, and if the form looks good, nothing happens until something happens. So they fill out 1148.2 that they're going to rework one well. Rework is a vague term. They have to put some detail in. They don't fill out the form properly, and they don't fill out 1148.2 that they're going to drill 2 additional wells. So now you're in month 2, and they've got 5 violations. They've got 3 building and safety violations in November, and they've got 2 1148.2 violations in December. And again, they say, oh, it was a mistake. Even though they're using the exact same staff, PXP people, Vicki Gresham up in San Bernardino has been their permit writer for 7 years, and apparently all of a sudden she can't fill out permit requests. So now we move into January. We're starting to get very nervous. We're starting to meet with one another. We're starting to have community meetings. We're starting to reach out to AQMD. We're starting to reach out to Dogger. We're starting to reach out to Herb Wesson, who's the city council rep and president here. We're starting to reach out to Holly Mitchell. We're starting to reach out to a lot of different people. January 7th, I step into my backyard and I smell a funny smell. And we have been told if you live near a well and you smell something funny, you call 1-800-CUT-SMALL. That's what you do. That's AQMD, and they send an inspector out. So they send an inspector out. Boots on the ground. 4 hours later, this guy walks in the field, and he finds a methane gas leak. One of the byproducts of drilling oil is methane gas. It's on the field all the time. It is their job to store the water that they use in the well, the crude that comes out of the well, and the methane that comes out of the well. It is their job to store it and store it properly. They have a methane gas leak that is 40 times the allowable limit, which is 50 parts per million. They have 20,000 parts per million is leaking. It's non-odorized gas. It's on an oil field that is, if the oil field is 6 o'clock and you go around the clock face, you have an AIDS Health Foundation that has subterranean labs where people with AIDS and HIV go for testing and treatment. You have a convalescent home, which has like 130 people who all have mobility issues, and over half of them have respiratory issues. You have a daycare facility for adults and children with permanent physical, mental, and emotional disabilities. You have the UCLA Clark Library, which has all of its offices underground and has been smelling gas the whole time they've been drilling. You have LA 84 Foundation, which is another historic building like the UCLA Clark. They have all the memorabilia from the 2 times LA has hosted the Olympics. You have Independence Square, which is a high-rise retirement home for seniors, many of whom are low income, they don't have cars. Then you have St. John of God, which is a hospice care facility where people are going for end-of-life care. And then right next to the well on the east side, you have St. Andrew's Garden, which is a low-income housing development full of kids. So you have a methane gas leak at 40 times the allowable limit in the middle of the most vulnerable population in the city of LA. And they have no idea it's happening. A random inspection by an AQMD inspector who would not have gone if I hadn't smelled something and phoned in. So they fix it. They said, Freeport McMoRan says, well, we fixed it. Well, of course you fixed it. You have to fix it. Otherwise, eventually it will blow up. I mean, it's like you leave the gas on in your oven and you don't light it. What's going to happen eventually? So 3 days later, someone else smells something and they phone AQMD. And AQMD goes back to the field and they find the cover for the water is the water storage tank is torn and it has holes in it. Now, when people like me hear the water storage tank cover was torn, I think, oh, you know, like a pool. Except this is not that kind of water. This is water that has been in the ground thousands of feet. It is mixed with raw crude oil. It is mixed with the naturally occurring radon. It is mixed with the chemicals that have gone into the well. It is mixed with all sorts of lubricants that are used in the well drilling. It will never, ever be recoverable water. It will never be used for human consumption. It will never be used for irrigating along the freeways. It will never be used for anything but oil production because it is full of these toxic chemicals that give off vapors. So if the cover is not in place, the vapors escape. And the Alenco well, which was shut down, I love, Alenco says, it was a voluntary shutdown. It was a voluntary shutdown to avoid a forced shutdown by the city, and they are being sued by the city attorney's office. And they have years of violations documented. One of the key factors with the Alenco well shutdown was vapors. That's why people's noses were bleeding, that's why they were getting headaches, that's why children were vomiting, that's why paint was peeling off of buildings, because the vapors were escaping. So again, Freeport McMoRan says, we got a new cover. I mean, they play it all down. So after that happened, we really mobilized. We got a Facebook page, we got a Twitter account, we held a very large meeting at Holman United Methodist Church, which is really the civil rights church in Los Angeles during the civil rights movement in the 60s. We're shocked. Everyone turns up. Hundreds of citizens turn up. Before the meeting, we go door to door and we get signatures. We want the city, we want Herb Wesson's office to stop their new oil work until we know what the heck is going on up there. Because they don't want to meet with anybody, they don't want to talk with anybody, they don't want to let our professional on site. They don't. So we collect 800 signatures in 2 weeks. We get the fire department there at this meeting, we get the police department, we get KPCC, we get KTLA, we get Holly Mitchell, who's the newest senator in the California State Senate. We get Karen Bass, who was a longtime advocate in this neighborhood. We get AQMD, we get the representatives from the neighborhood around Alenco. We get everybody there, except a representative from Freeport McMoRan.
Except what?
A representative from Freeport McMoRan. They chose not to have anything to say. And Herb Wesson shuts them down. He shuts down any new production. And then Food and Water Watch comes onto our radar, and they say, you know, actually we are pushing for a motion to be passed to put a moratorium on fracking until we know what fracking is. Because every time there's a problem that is discovered by citizens like us, the oil industry turns around and says, well, we have a new term for that. It's no longer fracking, it's well stimulation. Part of the problem, as Brenna alluded to, with all these formerly sort of dead wells, is the new technology. And the problem that we have in historic West Adams is most of these wells, most of these oil fields are south of the 10. Historically, south of the 10 has been a neighborhood of color. It has been a neighborhood of single mothers. It has been a neighborhood of high apartment rates rather than home ownership rate. It has been a neighborhood of high poverty rates and what Holly Mitchell so insightfully calls deep poverty. It has been a neighborhood where multi-billion-dollar corporations come and just do whatever they want to do and nobody pushes back. Well, historic West Adams is on the verge of gentrification. So Freeport McMoRan was very, very surprised when we were an informed, diverse, educated, and mobilized citizen advocacy group. They were very surprised. The last thing I will talk about is USC. One of the things that happens with the new type of drilling, slant drilling or horizontal drilling, you know, the old cartoon oil drilling is there's a big pool of oil and they stick a straw in it and they suck it straight up. And that's what used to happen, sort of. And now with the new technology, they can slant drill. They can go through the little, like the glass of ice, they can go through the little chasms and connect, send wells out a quarter of a mile, a half a mile out, and connect them with other wells. The Murphy oil field at 2126 West Adams Boulevard is about a mile from USC. It connects to the Jefferson oil well at Jefferson and Budlong, which is 4 blocks from USC. Last year, the Jefferson well at Jefferson and Budlong blew up. It sprayed oil and whatever else was down the well all over the cars, the houses, the lawns, pets in that neighborhood. And the chemical analysis showed that that well had been acid fracked. USC had nothing to say, even though USC had students living on Budlong at the time. USC had nothing to say during the Elenco debacle. Now, Elenco is in a neighborhood called University Heights. I'll give you 3 fat guesses why it's called University Heights. It's because of USC. USC had students living in University Heights during the Elenco problem. So I thought, follow the money. And I start looking at Freeport's board. Freeport McMoRan has 3 board members who are board members of USC. Freeport McMoRan was invited to speak to me, a little homeowner I was working at a restaurant at the time. I was a waitress homeowner with a dog, invited to go onto a public radio station here that's very popular, KPCC, Larry Mantle, a half an hour, 30 minutes. So who does Freeport McMoRan decide to send? They decide to send a guy named David Quast. David Quast stumps for the oil industry. People like Anarco, BP, Halliburton, the 3 death men of the Deepwater Horizon explosion. Those are the people who are now paying hundreds of millions of dollars. So he stumps for them. He stumps for Freeport. Before he was a spokesperson and a marketing person for the oil industry, he worked for Philip Morris, Big Tobacco. So he's really a guy who cares deeply about the health and well-being of children and humanity. So instead of sending a representative from Freeport McMoRan who could actually answer questions, why were Halliburton trucks seen for weeks if you're drilling 3 wells with traditional extraction that are shallow, 6,000, 8,000 feet deep? Why did you pay that kind of money to have Halliburton on site for that long? Why were there huge piles of sand being excavated from behind the well? Why was it a Bakersfield company that specializes in toxic well spill cleanup? Why won't you have a public meeting? Why won't you do an environmental impact report? Why? So instead of sending somebody who can actually answer the questions, they decide to send David Quast to talk to me. I mean, this guy makes like 7 figures. Who's David Quast? David Quast teaches at USC. USC is going to have nothing to say, in my very unprofessional opinion, until USC is dragged into a state's attorney case, which is what I think is going to happen with Elenco. Right now, they're in a city attorney case, which means it's civil. But once that case is done, I bet you 10 to 1. There are going to be damage cases that come up, liability cases, and that's criminal. And that's really what we have decided to do. Death by 1,000 cuts. We know everything we can about Freeport McMoRan personally, professionally, where their money is, what their legislation is, what their regulation is, what their permits are. We are volunteer citizens who are fighting to stop fracking in our neighborhood. in a model that we hope can be replicated at other oil fields. We are up against probably the worst corporate. In fact, it was nominated. Freeport McMoRan was nominated 3 years in a row as worst corporation on the planet by the One Eye Summit in Davos for human rights and environmental abuse in Papua New Guinea. So, you know, we partner with organizations like Food and Water Watch. We partner with our neighborhood organizations. We use social media. We talk to one another. But, you know, it's almost like a full-time job. And you know, it really is something that the oil company will tell you is not a problem. But when you look around and you do some research and you talk to some people and you start to really look, like what would happen if the methane gas had exploded and caught the well on fire, like the Deepwater Horizon? Because I mean, an oil field is essentially an oil lamp. The methane is the gas, it sparks it, and then it just ignites the oil until they can cap it. And if they can't cap it, like they couldn't cap the Deepwater Horizon, then it just burns until it's done. And we know that they will lie to us. An offshore rig was just caught saying, Freeport McMoRan has been saying, we are using acid to clean the wellhead, to clean the equipment. And what the Holly platform off the coast of Goleta was found to be doing was acidizing the well to stimulate production and then dumping the acid in the Pacific Ocean. And it's something like 3 miles off the coast of Goleta. So, you know, people are boating and swimming and surfing and their kids are playing. So we know that if citizens don't mobilize and align themselves with organizations that have legislative heft, that the oil companies will lie right to our face. And the only way I believe to change this is through legislation, to change the regulation. They have money. They will pay fines. They will buy people out. They will put people on their board. They will shut you up. They take your picture when you drive by the well. They take a picture of your license plate. You show up at the meeting. They know your name. They know your first name and your last name. You've never met them before. They know you. They have every resource they need. But if the regulation changes and the legislation changes, then it really hurts them because they can't produce. And that's really what they want to do. So. It's very long-winded. I expected Brenna to talk much longer.
Okay.